process of, I got initiated into the process of what is science, how science, religion, philosophy, and society interact. And there are different positions people take, but we must take a position as Christian, as a priest. I thought, and I got convinced to the idea that I have a special task of bringing these two sides of society together. In that context, in this plural world, even the world is becoming more and more aware of its diversity and plurality. And so we need to dialogue from different positions rather than simply, duologue. Duologue is between two poles. Science, religion could be thought of as two and talking to each other. I don't think we should go for, religious books looking for answers which are from the domain of science. So there is an independence of both the fields. They can't be merged into one. Science is science. Let it remain science in my life. It doesn't have to become a religion. And religion is religion. Let it stay religion. Don't make it science. That will be a danger. This is what I am standing for. That's why the dialogue. Dialogue expects these two to be independent and interdependent. My work is to make others also do that. So these two powerful forces within our society, they will run parallel. But as religious leader like me or anybody else, or even you as a simple religious person or a science person, will have to learn from the other and integrate it. So my whole point is science, religion can enrich each other. I choose the best of science and the best of religion to put together. If you put the best of science versus the worst of religion, who will win? This is Richard Dawkins does. Richard Dawkins is a scientist. If you see Richard Dawkins, he puts the best of science against the worst of religion. There is worst in everything. We are all mixed bags, whether you like it or not. Nothing pure. Everything is a little bit messy here and there. So the point I am trying to say, the best of science has to match the best of religion. And if I put the best of religion versus worst of science, religion will come up trumps. This is not what is expected. It has to be the best from both sides.
Passion is a broader term than empathy. So what you just mentioned, Sani, is empathy. I want to feel for somebody. I want to understand him. I want to investigate his thoughts. I want to stand in his shoes. I want to think how he thinks. And if I think how he thinks, then I can maybe understand the problem that he's in, and then maybe I can mete out the justice. Compassion is, after I've felt how he feels, I now want to do something to alleviate his misery. You see, so it is, to put it, I would say that affective or effective empathy is compassion, whereas empathy is just to feel. We have got something which is called the law. The law is a set of rules that are dictated by a sovereign, and they got a system of enforcement. On the flip side, there is justice. And justice operates in several ways. So justice can be preventive. Preventive means I do not allow you to do the crime again. Justice can be reformative. I kind of reform you so you don't do the crime again. Justice can be a deterrent. So that if I punish you, everybody else sees that you're being punished. And that is why they don't do it. Justice can be compensatory. You do something wrong, the other side pays you money. Justice can be retributive, because people who are wronged want a retribution. All this is very good on paper, but the fact remains, our system works slowly. our system is not the best system. And this is wherein the glaring injustices come, not because of the lack of laws. See, we got more than 3,000 laws in India. Give me a problem, I'll give you a law. The problem is with the implementation of the laws. And if the laws are not properly implemented, these kind of dichotomies are going to come about. We also surrendered them to a certain extent. So the government can take away a right to life and liberty. Now, how does the government do this? It's quite interesting. It is the government will tell you that to give you or guarantee your other fundamental rights, I got to take away some of your fundamental rights. So it's quite simple. If I'm going to give you I'm going to take away a right to privacy, is because I have to offer you security. So there's this little game plan that goes on, and that's true for all nations. It's not just true for India. There cannot be a right in absolution. Well, the best way to do it would be to educate and be informed. It's very simple. Knowledge is power. Slowly and steadily, if you do not demand your rights, if you do not wake up and say, hey, what's happening with me, your rights will get eroded. And once your rights get eroded, Karl Marx said, take away one right every generation. Take away one right every generation and there'll be no rights left. See? So what I would advise the citizenry to do is be aware of your rights, demand your rights. It is not necessary to be an activist. My dear, it's not necessary to be an activist. You can still, through the rule of law, demand your rights and be alert. And that way you will ensure that in the dispensation of justice and in making of the laws, the government and the judiciary both empathize with who you are and what your needs are, and you will get genuine laws and just justice.
To say that pollution being caused from burning coal, cars, cutting down forests, chemicals that are in our food or in industry, so things that they can see and relate to in their environment. And then to switch, so the first point is source, and the second point is then to switch into the impacts. So what this is doing is it's heating up our planet, and as a result, all of these weather changes we're seeing. So the monsoons are changing, we never have monsoons come on time. Or, it's becoming hotter. See all this air pollution that is happening. Here in Mumbai, we've had more cyclones and floods. And make it as local as possible, because now I have not gone to a single place in India that hasn't actually faced very serious and noticeable changes. Today in our world, we are driven more by selfishness and greed as values. And in our economy, the kind of economy we have, at each year we get these figures around GDP. What does GDP measure? It doesn't measure the value of a forest. It will only measure the value of a forest after you've chopped it down and mined what's underneath it. Then it's in your GDP. A GDP doesn't include the work that so many of our women and homemakers, men or women, do to look after our communities. Again, only if you monetize that does that become a GDP. So we fundamentally have a flawed way of seeing the value of society and of the planet. And as a result, we only tend to value things once you can sell them and buy them, which is such a cold-hearted way. Human interaction is not about buying and selling. So once you make that connection, then you can say, and so as a result, people are motivated to sell more things and to buy more things. But most of the things we buy, we don't actually need. So what do you have to do? You have to advertise and make people want things that they don't need. It's so nice to be encouraged to live more simply, because then you're just not getting stressed out about needing to buy stuff and then needing to keep it. Like you have to keep your house clean or your car fixed or all of these things that actually add so much stress in our life. And then to deal with that stress, we need to buy more stuff when you can just cut it all out and actually live a pretty simple life and be happier than pretty much anyone else you know. Then last but not least, to bring it down to individuals who are making the change, to say that actually already lakhs of people in India are already leading the change in communities, and they're doing it personally, and they're designing the solutions and inspiring other people. And the question is, are you going to be part of the solution, or will you be a part of the problem, both in your personal action, but also are you going to step up and lead the community and also advocate?
The nonviolent communication is basically something that was started by Marshall Rosenberg, who was a practicing psychologist earlier, and he was trying to look at certain questions on why do people behave violently, and why do some people, even in extreme situations, are still connected to their humanity, which means they don't behave violently. So he was talking about that, and he realized that one of the reasons for us to be violent, which means that when we act in ways that some people's needs are not met, is because we are constantly in this right-wrong thinking and a punishment and reward mentality. So I guess people have all kinds of creative ways to communicate their needs. So anything that is happening in this world is people's way to communicate their needs. So even when a violence happens, people are just letting you know that that's what they need. But unfortunately, nobody hears them. Nobody hears their needs. That's the sad part. So and they use the best tools that they know, what their childhood has taught them, what they have learned. And that's how they communicate their needs. But if you shout at somebody and ask your needs, the chances are much lower than when you really hear their needs also and try to find a solution where everybody's needs matter. And once we know the needs, my need and the other person's needs, especially in a challenging situation, because when we have conflicts, what do we say? We say, I want this, and they say, I want that. I can't give you that, and why can't you do this, and why can't you do that? So basically what we are asking from each other is that, can you help me meet my needs? And how do we ask each other? We can ask by making a demand. We can say, you do this, or we can make a request. But I think parents need to first understand that the difference between the need and the strategy. So they have to focus on the need, and let the child understand your need first, rather than the strategy, And because your need is always beautiful, nobody can judge your need. And the need would be care, need would be safety, need would be, sustainability. As the child, you want them to earn money, take care of themselves, self-care. So that's what you want. And only thing is that you have a belief system that after doing 12th exam and doing a medical or a doctor or an MBA or a bank service, that's going to give that security. So basically parents also responding to how society is structured. If the society is structured in a way that security comes from this. But I would say that's just one way. If your child is able to deal with if your child's emotional intelligence is high, I think that's also something very valuable. Because your child could be successful, but if they are not able to deal with these things, that could still be not a great idea. So so first of all, as parents, you have to think, what are the values that you want to give your child, which you see them, they're going to make them safe. So I would want you to think about emotional intelligence, interpersonal communication, dealing with challenges, conflict resolution. So there are many things that are valuable. But we are constantly focusing on either the marks or the salary, and we have seen that model. It doesn't work, all the time. So for me, my guidance to the parents would be to focus on the needs and try to see that what the world that you were living in and now the children are living is very different. You can't use a phone maybe, or you can't use the phone as much as your child can use. And they know the whole different world which you may not know.